So one of the things I wanted to try to communicate to our community today is something that will help us, in the coming week. It's an everyday Buddhism, an everyday Buddhism. So what can I share with you that will help you as you go forward into your week? And I think for me, it is the acknowledgement of the darkness that we see, the darkness around us, the darkness in our world, the darkness within ourselves. But the point I want to make is not that the darkness itself is inherently bad, but that there is great teaching within the darkness itself. So the title of today's Dharma talk is Sitting in the Dark, or Sitting in the Darkness. Also another title for this Dharma talk is Let the Darkness Be Your Candle. And I love that paradox, and I think that paradox is very appropriate right now. And that comes from a wonderful talk by Rumi. And if you think about it, what does a candle do? A candle lights our direction, shows us direction, reveals to us what is on the path or in the room. Darkness can do the same thing. It can lead us to where we need to be going. It can illuminate for us what we have failed to see. Mary Oliver, the poet, she wrote lines from a poem that some of you may know. Someone I loved once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that too was a gift. More wonderful paradoxes. So what I would like you to do, and I know some people take notes or write things down, is I'm going to ask a series of questions during this Dharma talk. And what I would encourage you to do is write a few of them down. And then during the week, ask yourself the question. It's kind of a form of reflection practice. So the first question will be, how can a box of darkness be a gift? And this is not about quick answers or the first thing that comes to your mind. These are things to reflect upon. Right? In Koyo Kabose Sensei's book, Bright Dawn, my teacher has a great chapter in that book on darkness. And in it, he teaches that every spiritual journey we take starts in the darkness. And he goes on to share an old Buddhist story about a small worm in a bamboo stalk. And I've always loved this story. So and I don't know if you've seen a bamboo forest. It literally is that. It is a forest full of bamboo stalks, 50 feet high, and they're swaying in the breeze. And inside one particular bamboo stalk, there is trapped inside on the very bottom joint of the bamboo, a small worm. Now, the worm does not know how he got there, but he knows he wants out. And he knows the way out is up. Don't ask him why. He just knows the way out is up. So he starts crawling, and as he crawls, he encounters a barrier, the joint. And he slowly eats his way through the joint and continues his upward climb toward what he believes is freedom. He realizes that he must continue to climb and eat his way to freedom. Up he goes. He falls down, he gets back up and goes up through this joint. He is a strong and determined little worm. And the bamboo stalk is very tall, And even though he's been eating for a long time, there's a long way to go. The only thing our worm knows is that he wants out. And finally, after a number of days, exhausted, he simply just stops and sits in the darkness. Now, how many of us have done that before? Trying to escape some personal darkness through our sheer force of will, or trying to come up with all the reasons that you ended up where you are right now. There's got to be a reason. And if I can figure out everything, then everything will be right in the world, as if life is some formula to simply be figured out. As if life was some simple problem to solve, as if life were logical, as if the darkness itself were the problem. Being stuck in the existential darkness, as one Roshi put it, we want to reduce reality into a concept, reduce life into a logical idea. Reality, unfortunately, is not logical. Truth is not rational, only our minds are. Reality is when we get past the conceptual and engage with life as it really is. So back to our story. So our worm is there resting in the darkness, sitting in the dark, in the stillness. And while in the stillness, she notices something. He notices something. He notices a small, tiny crack coming through the side of the stalk, her way back outside. Our worm sees the way to her freedom, literally sees the light only when she ceases effort and sits in the dark, rests in the dark, and not actively trying to escape it. In some ways, isn't that what it means to shut up and listen? I found this quote from Colin Moore. Quote, "The darker it gets, the more brightly the light shines." End quote. I love that. The darker it gets, the more brightly the light shines. Are we not experiencing that right now on so many levels? But even this brightly shining light can go unnoticed if we are frantically trying to escape it, trying to escape the darkness instead of learning and growing from it. This is so true, especially about our personal darknesses that only we know about. We all have a tendency to avoid the dark. For some reason, even as adults, we are afraid of the dark. Not the dark that can be tamed by electronic illumination, but the wild, unknown parts of ourselves. Working on this talk, I came across a wonderful essay by Reverend Kinray Basis, and it's a Buddhist monk she's a Buddhist monk from the Berkeley Buddhist Priory. Quote, in the essay, actually not quote, in the essay, she talks about the challenge we face in spiritual practice when we spend too much time talking about the light, talking about love and compassion, and forget the dark as a teacher. Let me paraphrase a quote from what Reverend Basis goes on to say. Quote, "Everything is in love, everything is love, I love everyone, yet this would be self-deception unless we are willing to see the boundless light and compassion in the darkness as well." End quote. Jung taught something similarly when he wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious." Buddhism teaches that it is by facing and dealing with darkness that we can fully realize that there is nothing to fear within life and death. A path which has us avoid the darkness is a path that can never bring us to true freedom, full knowledge of our immaculate Buddha nature. What darkness are we called to look deeply into right now? That is your second question. What darkness are we called to look deeply into right now? And when you're answering these questions, I want them to be very personal. I want them to be about your practice, your awareness. We can avoid doing that by going towards a more broad societal definition of what do we, the royal we, need to do. I want you to focus on your life specifically, your practice specifically, because this translates to the universal. It starts in the particular, but translates to the universal. I really see that the key to our practice is to see both darkness and the light, and to understand that one does not stand against the other. They both are our teachers. Now, we're very dichotomous in the West, and it's good and bad, right and wrong, and there is no room between. But we know from our personal experience that nothing is that simple. That nothing is that simple. We need to allow the light and the darkness to be our teachers so we can see more clearly. Like the small worm, we bring our whole selves out into the light. Jung goes on to say, how can I be substantial if I do not cast a shadow? I must have a dark side also if I am to be whole. Koyo Kubose Sensei goes on to say that, quote, realizing the darkness within oneself is the beginning of one's enlightenment, end quote. Here's your third question. What do you think that means? Realizing the darkness within is the beginning of one's own enlightenment. What does that mean? What does that mean in your life and your experience? But we are afraid to do this, and this is a challenging thing to do. Jung goes on to say, quote, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls, end quote. How many rationalizations have we all come up with to excuse our behavior or to make ourselves somehow better than someone else? Kubose Sensei goes on to say, quote, it's not so much we hide these qualities from others, but that they are not fully aware of, we are not fully aware of them ourselves. Spirituality requires a prerequisite of introspection. We need to look carefully and honestly and examine our own basic ignorance that creates anger and other aspects of ourselves so that we do not really look closely. Looking within is the beginning of seeing the darkness of ourselves. And somebody asked the second question. I will post all three questions on the Facebook page. Reverend Kinray Basis goes on again and says, most people do not know themselves and are afraid of the darkness they may find if they look into the depths of their own heart. What you reject within yourself, you will not want to see within another. And what you cannot love within yourself will be almost impossible to love in another. The misery within ourselves and the world is part of the whole, and we can never see the truth if we are not willing to see every part of it. The gateway to seeing the Buddha's face is through seeing and accepting the endless, varied forms of our inner and outer world. That is the heart of Namo Amida Butsu. Seeing and accepting ourselves as we are is the beginning of our journey born in darkness. Here is a different perspective of the Buddha's awakening, and it's from Padi Nakai of the Chicago Buddhist Temple. Quote, it's become a tradition in East Asian Buddhism to define Siddhartha's awakening not by dispelling of its previous ignorance, but by the direct confrontation within what was not bright, mumyo, deep within himself. The visceral realization of his ability to inflict pains on others. Prince Siddhartha became the awakened Buddha when he saw his own avidya, his own dark heart and mind, rather than merely his ignorance. End quote. I really appreciate that because that brings the Buddha back into the everyday as a human being and not as some concept. Even the Buddha descended into the darkness of his own mind to be able to wake up. Again, Reverend Basis, quote, when we show reverence, gratitude, and compassion to all things, including those we dislike, we are bridging the opposites and treating everything as part of the body of the Buddha, end quote. It's not enough to say boundless light exists. We must treat the darkness as if we are experiencing the boundless light within it, and then the opposite can be one. That was also Reverend Basis. The challenge is most of us don't want to experience Buddha nature without making this effort. But it is precisely the willingness that clears our vision so that we can experience the ever-present radiance of boundlessness. All of what I shared today is a call for us to change our relationship with the darkness in our lives. Our small ego self tells us that the dark is filled with monsters to keep under its spell. It's not until we courageously walk out into the dark that we see all of the monsters are not real, but just stories to keep us bound. It is incomprehensible to the small ego self that seeks pleasure and runs away from the painful to understand what Rumi the poet teaches when he tells us, what hurts you blesses you. Darkness is your candle, end quote. slowing down, being still, deeply listening. Because we can only see the light, but not only see the light in the darkness, but we can also hear the light of great compassion and freedom. And we can hear it in our own darkness. The room of our wildest and most authentic self, our most earthly selves, is a call and response. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Call and response. I want to leave with a wonderful quote from Soga Ryojin Sensei speaking about our practice. Quote, our practice. It is like the branches of a tree, while those branches stretch single-mindedly towards the sky, their roots are intent on going deep towards the center of the earth. Thus, the fact that the roots of a plant enter into darkness in search of a sure foothold, while the branches reach up to the sky in their yearning for light. End quote. My hope, my aspiration is that our practice may be like this tree, that we have the courage to put our roots deep into the darkness of ourselves, to reclaim that side of ourselves, to let go of the dichotomous thinking, and to be whole, and to learn from what's there, for what's calling out, to be seen and attended to. Namo Amida Butsu.